Jabari Mwangi was 29 years old when his life changed in a single evening. He had spent years working hard in Nairobi, Kenya, believing that if he stayed honest and gave his best, everything would eventually work out. But life had other plans. The company where he worked suddenly cut jobs, and Jabari found himself unemployed. For weeks he searched for another position, but every interview ended with the same answer: "We'll call you." Nobody ever did. His savings were disappearing fast, and after paying his last rent, he had only one place left to go. He packed a few clothes into 2 worn bags and drove to his parents' house, convinced they would let him stay for a few weeks until he got back on his feet. After all, that's what family was supposed to do. When he knocked on the door, his father opened it with a cold look. Jabari tried to explain what had happened, hoping for understanding. Before he could finish, his father grabbed both bags and threw them onto the driveway. "A real man shouldn't come home empty-handed," he said without any emotion. The words hit harder than anything Jabari had ever heard. Then he looked toward his mother, expecting her to defend him or at least show some kindness. Instead, she laughed quietly and shook her head as if she agreed with every word. At that moment, Jabari realized he was completely alone. He picked up his bags without saying anything. His chest felt heavy, but he refused to cry in front of them. He got back into his old hatchback and drove through the dark streets of Nairobi with no destination in mind. Hours later, he found an empty parking lot on the edge of the city. Rain started pouring, hitting the roof of the little car so loudly that it drowned out every other sound. The driver's seat was uncomfortable, and the cold air slowly filled the car. That night became his first night without a home. Jabari stared through the rain-covered windshield for a long time. He thought about everything he had lost in just a few weeks: his job, his apartment, and now the people he believed would never turn their backs on him. The pain was almost too much to carry. But somewhere between the sound of the rain and the silence inside the car, something changed. He wiped away his tears, took a deep breath, and made himself one quiet promise. One day, he would build a life so strong that this painful night would become nothing more than the beginning of his story. The people who laughed at his lowest moment would remember him for something completely different. From that night on, Jabari stopped waiting for someone to save him. He decided he would save himself. As Jabari lay awake inside his old hatchback that night, he kept asking himself the same question: how did it come to this? The more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't really about losing his job. That was only the final straw. The truth was much deeper. His parents hadn't suddenly stopped caring about him. They had treated him differently for as long as he could remember. Growing up, there was always one star in the Mwangi family, and that was his older brother, Kamau. Everyone called Kamau the future of the family. His parents spoke proudly about him to relatives, neighbors, and even strangers. If Kamau scored good marks in school, the whole family celebrated. If he made a mistake, they quickly found an excuse. "He's still learning," his mother would say. "Boys will be boys," his father would add. No matter what happened, Kamau was always protected. For Jabari, life was completely different. He had to work twice as hard just to hear a simple "well done." If he brought home good grades, his parents would ask why they weren't even better. If he helped around the house, they acted as if it was simply his duty. When he stayed out of trouble, nobody noticed because that was what they expected from him. It felt like he had to earn every smile, every compliment, and every bit of attention. As they grew older, the difference became even clearer. Jabari studied hard, graduated, and found a stable job in Nairobi. He paid his own bills and never asked his parents for money. He thought they would finally be proud of him. Instead, every family gathering turned into another celebration of Kamau. Even when Kamau jumped from one risky business idea to another without success, his parents continued praising his big dreams. Jabari's steady job, discipline, and quiet achievements were barely mentioned. There were moments when Jabari tried to win their approval. He bought thoughtful gifts on birthdays, visited whenever he could, and called to check on them. He hoped that one day they would look at him with the same pride they showed Kamau. That day never came. It seemed nothing he did was ever enough. Now, sitting alone inside his car with rain tapping against the windows, everything finally made sense. Losing his job hadn't destroyed his relationship with his parents. That relationship had been broken for years. Losing his job simply exposed the truth he had been trying to ignore. For the first time, Jabari stopped blaming himself. He realized he wasn't the forgotten son because he had failed. He had been treated that way long before life knocked him down. And if he wanted a better future, he would have to stop chasing the love and approval that had always been given to someone else. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks slowly became months. Jabari never imagined he would spend so much time living inside his old hatchback, but somehow he made it work. Every morning before the city became busy, he folded the blanket he slept with, cleaned the inside of the car, and parked somewhere else so nobody would notice he was living there. He didn't want people to feel sorry for him. More than anything, he didn't want anyone calling his parents to tell them they had seen their son sleeping in a parking lot. Life became a daily challenge. Jabari signed up for a cheap public gym, not because he wanted to exercise every day, but because it gave him a place to shower, brush his teeth, and look presentable. No matter how difficult life became, he refused to look defeated. After changing into clean clothes, he would spend the day searching for work. Some days he carried heavy bricks at construction sites. Other days he delivered packages across Nairobi on a borrowed motorbike. The work was tiring, and the pay was small, but he accepted every honest job he could find. Every coin mattered. Jabari wrote down every single expense in a small notebook. He knew exactly how much he spent on food, fuel, parking, and even a cup of tea. Most of his meals were simple. Sometimes it was bread and tea. Sometimes rice and beans from a small roadside cafe. There were days when he stayed hungry just to save enough money for fuel so he could reach the next job. But while many people would have spent their evenings complaining about life, Jabari did something different. After finishing work, he drove to the public library. It was warm, quiet, and free. He borrowed books about successful entrepreneurs, watched free business lessons online, and taught himself digital skills like online marketing, bookkeeping, and basic website building. At first, many of the ideas seemed difficult, but he kept learning a little every day. He believed that knowledge could change a person's future, even if they had no money. Slowly, he started taking small freelance jobs online. They didn't pay much, but every project taught him something new. He saved every extra shilling instead of spending it. While others saw an unemployed man living in a car, Jabari saw himself as someone preparing for a better life. He wasn't waiting for luck to find him. He was building new opportunities with the little he had. Surprisingly, revenge was never the thing pushing him forward. He didn't dream about proving his parents wrong or making them regret what they had done. His biggest goal was much simpler than that. He wanted to prove to himself that he could survive without depending on anyone. Every difficult day he endured, every new skill he learned, and every small amount of money he saved made him stronger. Little by little, the man who had once been thrown out of his own home was becoming someone who would never have to beg for a place to stay again. One morning, Jabari accepted a delivery job that required him to drive from Nairobi to Mombasa. It was a long trip, but the pay was better than most of the small jobs he had been doing. He left before sunrise, hoping to finish the deliveries and return with enough money to cover his expenses for the next few weeks. He had no idea that this ordinary job would introduce him to the person who would completely change his future. His last delivery was to an older man named Omari Bakery, a retired businessman who owned several small rental buildings in Mombasa. Jabari arrived a few minutes early, carried the heavy boxes inside without complaining, and politely thanked the old man before turning to leave. Most people would have simply closed the door, but Omari noticed something different about him. He saw a young man who worked hard, spoke with respect, and never looked for excuses. "Young man, have you eaten today?" Omari asked. Jabari smiled politely and answered, "Not yet, but I'll eat later." The old man invited him inside for lunch. At first, Jabari felt uncomfortable accepting the invitation, but Omari insisted. As they shared a simple meal, they started talking. Omari asked about his work, his family, and his plans for the future. Jabari was honest. He admitted that he had lost his job, was doing temporary work, and was trying to build a better life. He didn't ask for money or complain about his parents. He simply told the truth. Omari listened carefully without interrupting. When Jabari finished, the old man nodded and smiled. "Many people lose everything," he said. "Very few keep their dignity while starting over." A few days later, Omari called Jabari with an unexpected offer. He didn't want to give him charity. Instead, he needed someone trustworthy to help collect rent, check on tenants, arrange repairs, and manage a few of his rental properties whenever he traveled. The pay was fair, and the work came with something even more valuable. Every time they met, Omari shared lessons that no school had ever taught. He explained how smart people invested their money instead of spending it to impress others. He showed Jabari how to negotiate without shouting, how to solve problems between landlords and tenants, and why protecting your reputation was more important than making quick money. He often said, "Wealth is built through patience, not showing off." Jabari listened to every word. He carried a small notebook everywhere and wrote down Omari's advice after every meeting. The more he learned, the more he realized that success wasn't about luck. It came from making good decisions over and over again. For the first time in years, someone believed in him without expecting anything in return. Omari didn't feel sorry for Jabari. He challenged him to think bigger, work smarter, and plan for the future. Looking back, Jabari understood that meeting the retired businessman was worth more than receiving a bag full of cash. Money could disappear overnight, but knowledge stayed with you forever. And those lessons would become the foundation of everything he built in the years ahead. The years passed faster than Jabari expected. The small freelance jobs he once depended on slowly turned into something much bigger. Using the money he had saved and the business lessons Mzee Omari had taught him, he started a small logistics company with just one used delivery van. In the beginning, he handled almost everything himself. He answered customer calls, loaded packages, drove long distances, and even cleaned the vehicle at the end of the day. Some nights he worked until sunrise, but he never complained. He remembered the days when he had prayed for even a single job. Now he treated every customer like they were helping him build his future. Little by little, his reputation grew. People trusted Jabari because he always delivered on time and kept his promises. One satisfied customer recommended him to another, and soon more businesses started calling. Within a few years, one van became 3. Then 3 became 10. His company expanded beyond Nairobi and began serving customers in Mombasa, Kisumu, Nakuru, and other parts of Kenya. He hired employees, opened a proper office, and built a business that people respected. Even as his company became successful, Jabari never changed the simple way he lived. He didn't post pictures of expensive cars or designer clothes on social media. He didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Most people had no idea how successful he had become because he preferred working quietly instead of chasing attention. He believed that real success didn't need an audience. At the same time, his parents continued talking proudly about Kamau. Whenever relatives visited, they spoke about his big plans and bright future, even though they knew very little about Jabari's life. They rarely called him, and when they did, the conversations were short. They never asked how he was doing or what he had achieved. They simply assumed he was still struggling somewhere, trying to survive. Jabari never tried to correct them. He didn't send photos of his business or tell anyone how much money he had made. He focused on his work and let his results speak for themselves. One day, after years of saving and investing wisely, Jabari bought a beautiful home in a quiet and secure neighborhood. It wasn't the biggest house in the area, but to him, it felt like a dream come true. As he walked through the front door for the first time, he stood silently in the living room and looked around. A memory suddenly came rushing back. He remembered the freezing nights inside his old hatchback, the sound of rain hitting the roof, and the fear of not knowing what tomorrow would bring. He smiled to himself. Every difficult moment had led him to this place. Nobody had handed him this life. He had built it one small step at a time. The man who once had nowhere to sleep now owned a home that no one could ever throw him out of. And without realizing it, the people who had given up on him were about to discover just how wrong they had been. While Jabari's life kept moving forward, things were slowly falling apart for Kamau. For years, he had chased one big business idea after another. Every new plan promised quick money and fast success. He borrowed from friends, took large bank loans, and convinced people to invest in his projects. Whenever someone warned him to slow down, he laughed and said that people who played it safe would never become rich. His parents believed every word he said. They were sure Kamau was only one step away from becoming a millionaire. But success never came. One business failed, then another. Instead of learning from his mistakes, Kamau took even bigger risks. He spent money he didn't have, bought expensive things to impress people, and continued living as if nothing was wrong. Before long, the bills started piling up. Phone calls from creditors became a daily problem. Some called politely at first, but soon they demanded payment. Others threatened legal action if the debts were not cleared. Watching their favorite son struggle, Jabari's parents did everything they could to save him. They emptied their savings accounts, sold valuable family belongings, and even borrowed money from relatives. Each time they helped Kamau, he promised that his next business would fix everything. It never did. The money disappeared, but the debts only grew larger. Eventually, there was nothing left to sell except the family home. It was the house where they had lived for many years, the same house where Jabari had once stood with his bags on the driveway after being thrown out. They fought hard to keep it, but they couldn't keep up with the financial pressure. The house was sold, and they were forced to leave with only a few suitcases and the belongings they could carry. For the first time in their lives, Jabari's parents truly understood what it meant to have nowhere to go. They stayed with relatives for a while, but they could tell they were becoming a burden. Friends who had once enjoyed visiting them slowly stopped answering their calls. The respect they had enjoyed for years disappeared almost overnight. Every day became more difficult. The same people who had laughed at Jabari for spending one night inside his old car were now searching for a place to sleep themselves. Life had changed in a way none of them had expected. Their pride slowly disappeared. They stopped talking about Kamau's big dreams because there was nothing left to celebrate. Instead of confidence, there was worry. Instead of laughter, there was silence. And as their options became fewer and fewer, they finally started thinking about the son they had pushed away years earlier. The son they believed would never become anything had quietly built a life they could no longer ignore. One quiet evening, after finishing a long day at work, Jabari was relaxing in his living room with a cup of tea. It had been a peaceful day. He had just finished reviewing reports from his company and was planning the week ahead. Outside, the sun was beginning to set and the neighborhood was calm. Then the doorbell rang. Jabari wasn't expecting anyone. He walked to the front door and opened it. The moment he looked outside, he froze. Standing in front of him were his parents. His father looked much older than he remembered. His shoulders were bent, and the confidence that had once filled his face was gone. His mother stood beside him, holding two old suitcases with both hands. Her clothes were neat but worn, and she couldn't even look Jabari in the eyes. They both looked tired, worried, and completely different from the proud people who had once turned him away. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. His parents looked past him into the house. They saw the clean living room, the beautiful furniture, and the quiet life Jabari had built for himself. It was hard for them to believe that this successful homeowner was the same son they had laughed at years ago when he had nowhere to sleep. Finally, his father cleared his throat and spoke in a soft voice that Jabari had never heard before. "Jabari, we've been going through some difficult times," he said. "We don't have anywhere else to stay. Could we stay here just for a little while?" Those words hung in the air. Years ago, Jabari had stood outside their house asking for only a few weeks to get back on his feet. Back then, the answer had been cold and immediate. Now the same request was coming from the people who had refused to help him. His mother still couldn't meet his eyes. She held the suitcase tightly and quietly whispered, "Please." Jabari looked at both of them without saying a word. Memories rushed through his mind. He remembered his father throwing his bags onto the driveway. He remembered his mother's laughter. He remembered the cold night inside his old hatchback and the promise he had made to himself while the rain fell outside. Everything had changed. The frightened young man who had once begged for understanding was gone. Standing at the doorway now was a confident businessman who had built his life through years of hard work and sacrifice. For the first time in many years, the balance of power had completely changed. The people who had once decided his future were now waiting for his decision. Jabari took a slow, deep breath. Then, without anger or a raised voice, he stepped aside from the doorway. "Come inside," he said calmly. His parents walked into the house, carrying their worn suitcases. Neither of them realized that the hardest part of the night was still waiting for them. Jabari led his parents into the living room and asked them to sit down. He offered them water and something to eat. They thanked him quietly. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Nobody knew how to begin the conversation. His parents looked around the beautiful house, clearly surprised by everything they saw. It was hard for them to believe that the son they had once considered a failure had built such a peaceful and successful life. After a few moments, Jabari sat across from them. His face was calm. There was no anger in his voice, no shouting, and no desire to embarrass them. But he also knew he could not pretend that the past had never happened. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly. "Do you remember the night I came home after losing my job?" His parents looked at each other without answering. "I remember every single detail," Jabari continued. "I remember standing at the front door with my bags. I remember Dad throwing them onto the driveway. I remember Mom laughing and saying that a real man shouldn't come home empty-handed. And I remember spending that night sleeping inside my car while it rained." His mother lowered her head. His father let out a deep sigh. After a long silence, his father finally spoke. "We only wanted to make you stronger," he said. "Life is hard. We thought if we pushed you, you would learn to stand on your own." His mother quickly nodded. "We never thought things would become so difficult for you. We believed it was for your own good." Jabari listened without interrupting. Then he stood up, walked to a small cabinet, and returned with an old box. He placed it gently on the table and opened it. Inside were old photographs, a worn notebook, and his old mobile phone. He picked up one photograph. It showed his old hatchback parked alone in a nearly empty parking lot. "I took this the morning after my first night in the car," he said softly. Then he opened his old phone and showed them messages he had saved for years. They were the texts he had sent after being thrown out. "Dad, I only need a few weeks until I find another job. Mom, please. I have nowhere else to go." There were no replies. Jabari looked at them with calm eyes. "I kept these because I never wanted to lie to myself about what happened," he said. "I didn't save them to get revenge. I saved them because I promised myself I would never forget how that night changed my life." Neither of his parents spoke. The room became completely silent. The excuses they had prepared no longer sounded convincing. Looking at the photographs, the unanswered messages, and the pain that Jabari still remembered so clearly, they finally understood something they had never realized before. He had forgiven enough to welcome them into his home, but he had never forgotten the night they left him without one. The silence in the room lasted for a long time. Jabari's parents looked down at the floor, unable to find the right words. They knew they had hurt him deeply, and for the first time, they understood just how much pain they had caused. They expected Jabari to tell them to leave. After everything that had happened, they believed they deserved it. Instead, Jabari spoke calmly. "I won't take revenge," he said. "Revenge won't change the past, and it won't make my life any better." His parents slowly looked up at him, surprised by what they had just heard. "But that doesn't mean things can go back to the way they were," Jabari continued. "I have worked too hard to build this life. I won't allow anyone, even family, to destroy the peace I've found." His father quietly nodded. He understood that his son was no longer the young man they could control. Jabari explained that they were welcome to stay only for a couple of nights while he arranged something better. The next morning, he contacted a friend who managed a small apartment building and paid for a simple furnished apartment where his parents could live for a few months. It wasn't a luxury home, but it was clean, safe, and gave them a chance to start again. He also helped them meet a financial advisor who showed them how to manage the little money they had left. Together, they applied for financial assistance programs and found small part-time jobs that matched their age and abilities. Jabari paid some of the first expenses, but he made one thing very clear. "I will help you get back on your feet," he said, "but I will not become your permanent safety net. You have to take responsibility for your own future, just like I had to." His parents didn't argue. For the first time, they understood that love did not mean unlimited support without responsibility. They finally realized that respect could not be demanded simply because they were parents. Respect had to be earned through kindness, honesty, and the way people treated each other. A few days later, Kamau came to visit Jabari. He looked nothing like the confident older brother everyone had once admired. The expensive clothes were gone. The proud smile had disappeared. He quietly looked around the house and then turned to Jabari. "I was wrong about you," Kamau admitted. "I always thought I would be the successful one." Jabari smiled gently. "This was never a competition," he replied. "I just refused to give up." Kamau lowered his head. For years, he had underestimated the younger brother who worked quietly without asking for attention. Now he could clearly see the truth. The strongest person in the family had never been the loudest, the richest looking, or the most praised. It was the brother who had survived rejection, rebuilt his life with patience, and chose wisdom over revenge when he finally had the power to do otherwise. A few months later, Jabari stood on the balcony of his home as the sun slowly set over the city. His businesses were doing well, and his company had grown far beyond anything he had imagined during those lonely nights inside his old hatchback. He owned several successful businesses, employed many people, and lived a life that once seemed impossible. But when he looked back, he realized that money was never his greatest achievement. His biggest victory was that he had refused to let pain turn him into a bitter person. He could have chosen revenge when his parents came asking for help. Instead, he chose wisdom, forgiveness, and healthy boundaries. He helped them without forgetting the lessons that had made him stronger. That decision gave him something money could never buy: peace of mind. His parents had changed too. They no longer judged success by loud promises or expensive appearances. They finally understood that true strength comes from hard work, patience, and treating people with kindness. The son they had once laughed at had become the person they respected the most. As Jabari's story spread from one person to another, it inspired many young Africans who were struggling with rejection, failure, or lack of support from their own families. His journey reminded them that a difficult beginning does not decide the rest of their lives. Sometimes the people who believe in you the least become the ones who are most surprised by your success. Jabari smiled as he remembered the promise he had made to himself on that rainy night inside his car. He had kept that promise. The man they never believed in had become living proof that resilience, patience, and self-respect can build a future that no one can ever take away.